Welcome. I am C.L. Fernari.
I'm Ellen Zakos.
And we are about to stage a houseplant rescue.
Yeah. And you guys have brought a lot of things in for us to rescue, so thank you very much.
That's right. So we want to talk about how to rescue houseplants, when it can be saved, and when you might want to say goodbye. So, and we realize that there are often sentimental reasons why people keep houseplants. So we're going to talk about that too. So,
it's not always easy to say goodbye, especially if you've had something for 35 years.
That's right.
But sometimes it's what has to be done, and we will try to be kind.
That's right. So I think that we should start out with a holiday plant,
Okay.
Ellen.
Oh, yeah.
And I have here a Poinsettia pretty pathetica. This poor thing suffered from overwatering.
It's dripping right now as you tilt it.
It's dripping right now, that's right. I went away for a week and it was wilted, and someone thought it was wilted because it was thirsty. But it was actually wilted because it was too wet. And so it kept getting watered in an attempt to bring it back to life, but of course it just made it worse. Mm-hmm. Shall we save this, Ellen?
In the first place, I have to tell you all, I don't like poinsettias. I'm anti-poinsettia. It's a holiday gift plant. I feel like, I know I'm stepping off camera, I feel like if you need red and green in your house, try this. This is going to live for years and years, and it's the same color palette. I'm kind of anti-poinsettia because...
But it's not big and lush, Ellen.
Well, so then get a big one. I don't know. If that were my plant, this is a crown of thorns. Crown of thorns. It's a succulent plant, and we'll talk about that a lot later.
And it's spiny. Is that the message you want to give off at Christmas?
Oh
no, no.
I'm sorry. If this were my plant, it would be in the trash can right now.
Well, it might be in the trash can.
Yeah.
The bottom line for this poinsettia is, if this was a sentimental plant, if somebody very dear to me had given it to me, I might want to, at this point, we know it's been overwatered. That means that the roots are probably rotting, mm-hmm. right? Mm-hmm. And so I might want to tip it out of the pot. Now, it doesn't look too bad.
No, there's some live roots in there.
Yeah, I want to show you. See how those roots are tan here? That's a good sign, because a tan or white root is a live root. A brown root is a rotten root, all right? And if this were all brown, then I would say it was a goner for sure.
It doesn't smell bad.
It doesn't smell swampy.
And that's another good key.
If it smells swampy, it's probably a goner, because that means it has bacteria in it, and the bacteria are problematic. So if this were a sentimental plant, I might take it out. I might pull a little of this dirt out, put it back in a new pot. As long as I was at it, I'd give it a little larger pot, and I'd probably put it in a clay pot. Now, why a clay pot? Because I would want to send this plant to summer camp.
Yeah.
And a clay pot outside is heavier, and the plant isn't going to blow over.
And another thing that the clay pot does is, when a plant is in a clay pot, it's going to lose moisture through the walls of the pot as well, because that's porous. And for a plant like the poinsettia that doesn't want to be, I mean, look at all this water dripping out of that. She's not squeezing it. That's just saturated soil. Now she's squeezing it. But a plant that likes to dry out a little bit between waterings is going to be happier in clay, because it will lose some water through the walls of the pot, and you don't run the risk of it getting oversaturated.
You know, a poinsettia doesn't like to be constantly wet, because this is a plant from Mexico. Doesn't rain frequently in Mexico, right? It has very dry periods. So now, this Poinsettia pretty pathetica, it is not a sentimental plant.
Wait, before you do anything drastic,
yes,
I have a question. Okay, so you've repotted it, you've put in fresh soil, you've put it in a clay pot. Would you also cut it back, and if so, how far?
You could cut it back, although my guess is it's going to drop these bracts anyway.
Yeah.
My guess is this plant...
Wait. She just said bract. Do you guys all know what that is? No. Okay. A bract is a modified leaf. So if you think that these are flowers, they aren't. They are really leaves that are modified to be red. And if this were in bloom, you can see this right here, they have tiny little yellow flowers. Those are the true flowers. So when she says it's going to drop these bracts, this is foliage. It's all foliage.
That's right. They're the colorful leaves.
Yeah.
And it's going to drop all of those. So I don't know whether you certainly could take a pair of pruners and snip it off like this, right? And because it has all of these leaf nodes, it would probably leaf out from the leaf nodes. A leaf node is where the leaf attached to the stem in the past. And it probably would leaf out, and I'd give it a little fertilizer, and at the end of May, I'd send it out to summer camp in a place where it got morning sun and afternoon shade, and it would grow back. However, would it ever be big and lush like a poinsettia is in our greenhouses in December?
Never.
No, because poinsettias that you save at home end up being leaner and meaner because they are not raised under optimum conditions in a greenhouse.
Yeah.
So this is a plant that I think we say goodbye.
We thank you for your service.
That's right.
And goodbye. Yeah.
We thank it for coming,
Yeah.
and we say goodbye. I'm just going to get this to rinse my hands.
Sure.
All right. So
Can I choose the next one?
you certainly can.
All right. A lot of people brought in orchids in a lot of different stages of, dare I say, desperation. Some not so desperate at all.
Ellen has written books on orchids. She is an orchid expert.
Yes.
So
I love orchids. I really do. And I hate to see them suffer. Okay. So this is a perfectly healthy little orchid. It's finished blooming for the year, but it's perfectly healthy. And who brought this in? Okay, only because she wants to have it repotted. And a bunch of you have probably purchased orchids that are potted in sphagnum moss.
yeah.
You see that?
But what I love about this, Ellen, is that the roots aren't brown.
No.
Because I can't tell you the number of plants that we see coming into the greenhouse here that are planted in sphagnum moss in these little plastic cups, and the roots are completely brown
And rotted.
because there's just no breathing here, right?
And the reason that it's the combination, as C.L. mentioned, of the sphagnum moss and the plastic that leads to root rot. This is an epiphyte. It means it's a plant that grows on another plant. So if you were trekking through the rainforest, you would see this perched in a tree, the roots would be exposed to the air, and it would never rot because they'd be getting good air circulation. But growers grow them in sphagnum moss because, look, it doesn't fall off. This orchid here in bark mix, if I tipped it over, it would all fall out. So it makes sense for the grower. But once you get it home, you want to take it out of the plastic and you want to get rid of the sphagnum moss and repot it in bark where it's going to be a lot happier.
This is another example of the sphagnum moss
Yeah.
syndrome,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Right. We'll get to this one.
This
in a
one,
little
I'm
while.
afraid, is going the way of the poinsettia. Just a preview if you want to look away. Yeah. So the first thing I'm going to do is cut off the bloom spike. Now, a lot of phales, if you cut off the bloom spike while it's still green, will rebloom from that same spike, about 60% of the time. But once the spike has turned green, you might as well just snip
Brown.
that off.
Yeah, once it's turned brown. Yeah.
Sorry, brown, yes.
Yeah.
As far down as you can.
Here's one that's still green.
Yeah.
Right? So this one has possibility for putting out even another spike on the side, just like this has here.
C.L., do you want to say a word about this pot?
Well, the problem with this pot is there's no drainage hole, all right? Now, it is a clay pot, which is in its favor in terms of breathability, but it still needs a drainage hole. There is a reason why orchid pots have a lot of holes on them. And sometimes they have holes on the side, like this pot, and sometimes they have holes on the side and the bottom, like this pot. And once again, we're thinking about reproducing the conditions in nature.
Exactly.
How this plant grows.
Yeah.
This plant grows up on the bark of a tree, a lot of air around, right? A lot of places, ways to shed the water. That's what we're aiming to reproduce.
So if you don't have an orchid pot with special little holes, you can put this in a clay pot. It's going to be perfectly fine in a clay pot, but you want to make sure it's got drainage holes in it. You probably notice I've been kind of working with these roots here, pulling the sphagnum moss out. You do not need to be afraid to manhandle these roots. These plant roots are tougher than you and I are. And it's pretty easy. This was actually very easy to peel off. If you feel like it's too sticky, you could always swish it around in a little bit of water to loosen the last little bits of sphagnum moss. But I've got it all depotted, unpotted here, and we're ready to put it back. Do we have a pot to use?
Well, is this too big?
Way too big.
This is way too big. Lily, would you mind getting us a clay pot that's a little bit smaller
4-inch
than
maybe?
this?
Ones that have little holes on the side, and also we have little ones in the greenhouse with the a regular little orchid pot.
That are bigger than this?
Tiny bit bigger than that, yes. I'll go get both.
Okay.
Okay.
The idea when you're transplanting a plant because it's too big for the pot, you only want to go up one pot size, and the reason for that is. Every plant has needs their own balance of wet and dry. So as the roots spread through the soil, they absorb moisture from the soil, and then the soil's dry for a little bit. And plants have a specific balance. A fern is going to need to be more moist than an epiphytic orchid. So if you give a plant a pot that's too big, there's going to be surrounded by moist soil throughout which the roots have not grown yet. And that means the root ball is going to be surrounded by wet soil, and it may very well rot. So you don't want to take something from a 2-inch pot to an 8-inch pot. That's not going to be good for the plant. You might think it's going to save you work in the long run. Yeah?
Would you be able to hang that, let's say, in a bathroom where people are showering without any soil, just like that?
You could, or you could mount it on a piece of bark or on a piece of cork, something like that.
She asked for, just so that it's on the tape, if we could
Sorry.
hang that in the bathroom without any soil, and so that it got, you know, the bathing of the
humidity.
Of the humidity. How about this one?
I like this one.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay
All
to
right.
put it in here?
Yeah. All right.
Excuse me, how often should that be watered?
She asked how often should it be watered?
It should, how often, yes, thank you for remembering to repeat the questions. I'm just
Well,
like,
I'm remembering at the moment,
Yes,
Ellen.
good,
But
good.
next time you'll remember and I won't. So.
bright indirect light, if you have an east-facing or a west-facing window, that's the best for the Phalaenopsis. It's not a highlight orchid. So if you only have a south-facing window, bring it in a little bit away or have a sheer curtain up. These are perfectly capable of getting sunburned. You'll notice blotches on the leaves if it gets too much light. Once it is in bark mix instead of in moss, I would say you're going to want to water this once every 5 to 7 days. And the best way to water an orchid that's in clay is to just sit it in a bowl of water and let it sit there for 5, 10, 15 minutes. And that way both the clay pot and all the bark nuggets will absorb as much water as they possibly can, take it out, let it drain in the sink, and then put it back in place on a saucer.
And you'll notice we're using certain products today. They're products that we like, number one. And they are products that if you have houseplants, if you have several orchids, you might want to have them on hand. You have a sort of a rescue kit of your own.
Yeah.
And so the things that we're talking about today, keep in mind or jot them down as possible components for your home rescue houseplant kit.
Now, I gotta say, this is actually 2 little orchids in here. I don't know if you noticed it. It's got a baby in there. Oh, oh. Oh! I will pot them back up together for you because, but that's just, I just wanted to show you that.
All right.
Cool.
So we've got our orchid bark mix here.
Yeah.
All right. And you know, some mixes have a little perlite in them, some have charcoal in them. This looks like it has a little of both,
and
as well as the bark.
What you're going to notice about this is it's big and it's chunky, and that means that air is going to get in there, and the roots are going to be exposed to the air, and that's good for this kind of orchid. So you can
All right. You want this in here?
Yeah. Put a little bit in the bottom, and then I'm going to hold this orchid in the center.
Okay.
And I'm going to spread its roots out, and then CL is going to fill in. One question I get a lot about this is these orchids have special roots that in nature help it cling to the tree. And you'll notice if you're growing it in a pot at home that oftentimes the roots, like this one here, stick out of the pot, and people say, well, should I bury them? Is that okay? It's perfectly okay. You don't need to bury them. That's just how they grow. So don't feel like you have to divert the roots from this kind of orchid down into the bark mix. They should be exposed to the air. Yeah, that's a big piece.
Okay.
So I'm really pushing the bark mix down in there so it gives some good anchorage.
And because this pot is so small, I'm kind of fishing for some of the smaller pieces of bark that are
I
in
think
the
we're
container.
pretty
Are we good?
Yeah.
All right.
You don't happen to have orchid clips here, do you? You do?
Well, actually, there are some I see on those steps right there in front of you. You see this orchid right here?
Here. Well, this belongs to
no,
somebody.
No. I meant the metal kind that go across the pot.
Oh,
Okay.
okay.
There is a kind of clip. Now, sometimes when an orchid is just planted, it doesn't stand up very straight. And there are clips that you can get for that, but I think this is also going to be fine. just
Now,
the
do
way
we
it is.
water it at this point?
The only reason I'm not watering it is because I'm going to send it home with you and I don't want it to drip all over your car. But when you do get home, I would take a pot of water, fill it up, and sit this in it. The water should come you don't want to put the water over the edge because then the bark will all float out. But sit it in water up to here for 15 minutes and then let it drain and you're going to be good to go.
It looked like you were really packing that.
I was really packing it in, yeah. Like I said, you don't have to be gentle with these roots. You don't want to abuse them just for the sake of, but you can be firm. You can be firm, yeah.
I find that when you soak the orchid roots for about 15 minutes beforehand putting in the pot, they're a little bit more pliable and easier.
Oh, that's a good point.
Yeah.
Lily made the point that she finds in the greenhouse as well as at home, you do orchids at home, as well as at home, that if she soaks the orchid plant well in for about 15 minutes in water and then pots them up, that they're a little bit more pliable.
Good
so that's
point.
a good tip.
Yeah.
That's a good tip. Well,
Does that what? Does it need, look, I remembered to repeat the question. Does that need fertilizer? I would say it probably doesn't need fertilizer right now, and the reason is Phalaenopsis orchids bloom once a year. And usually, if you got this one in bloom, did you get it just a couple months ago or a month ago? Yeah. So that means that probably February is its bloom time every year. So what I would suggest is don't feed it now. And if it comes to be November or December next year and you do not see a bloom spike starting, then you might give it some food. But you don't need to feed it between now and then because that's the rest time for this
yeah,
plant.
what I usually do with my orchids is when I send them out for summer camp, I will, at that point, either sprinkle some time-release fertilizer on the pot or a little organic fertilizer, such as flower tone or rose tone or plant tone, and then they're fed slowly through the summertime. So that's just my method of doing it. Let's go on to another orchid.
All right, it's going to be, okay, here, let's see what the audience says. Can this plant be saved? No. Whose was this?
Whose plant is
The
it?
gentleman.
Okay.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Now, is this a sentimental plant for you?
Because if it is, we're sorry, but
A month ago, they were healthy. When we left for Florida, we put them in the water.
Okay. When
They're very healthy.
When you left for Florida a month ago, they were well watered. Were they soaking in water at that point? No. No, they were just well watered.
The other thing is the house was probably cooler than usual.
And the house was colder than usual. All right. And
it was 50-ish? Well, that could be a big part of your problem. Phalaenopsis can take it to 55 or 60, except when they're in bud. But if this got down to 50 or a little bit below, you may also have suffered cold damage.
well, I want to take this out and take a look at it, and we can see there's another problem besides cold damage here.
Okay.
And that is, you see how these roots are all brown here
If you could smell
and
this,
collapsed? All right.
It's smelly.
They're rotted.
Yeah.
So this is another example of the sphagnum moss keeping the area around the plant too wet. Okay? And had it been, yeah, I can smell it.
It smells bad.
Yeah, had
can
it
smell it over there, yeah.
been in orchid bark, it might have had a longer life. Now, the roots up here are looking okay.
But there's not a single leaf that is in good shape.
Okay. That's
So
a
this
good,
plant, this
that's
plant
a-
is not, now this one, you've got a leaf or two. So if you said, my great Aunt Vicky gave me this orchid, please do everything you can, even though there are a lot of rotten roots here, it might be savable. I'm not going to advise it. Yeah.
But Ellen, see this green leaf?
Just
It
because you
looks
can
so
save something
good.
doesn't mean, ooh, and this is, I'm
Okay.
getting stickiness there. Is there an insect pest problem on this plant? So oftentimes when you feel a stickiness,
When you
it's a
feel
question
stickiness, yeah, no, I don't
honeydew
see
or-
anything. But I guess I ultimately do have to agree with Ellen, and the reason is there may be a green leaf here or 2 green leaves, but look at the roots. The roots, you know, even the lightest color roots are collapsed and on their way out.
And when you see this little thread coming out from the center of the root, that's doom.
Yeah.
That means the outside of the root has
Yeah.
sloughed
Yeah.
away and rotted. And
So
Say
we have
goodbye.
to say goodbye. Thank you for coming.
thank you for your service.
Goodbye.
The last orchid we have over here is not in bad shape. Is this yours? Somebody who brought this one? Yeah, okay. This one is not in bad shape, but it's good that you brought it in because it's heading down a dangerous path. And we're going to save it.
We're going to save it. All right.
Look at the bottom of this pot. No drainage in there. Right?
It's a very stylish pot.
beautiful pot.
Gorgeous pot, but not so good for the plant.
Yeah,
Is it
yeah.
in another pot, in
Yes.
that pot?
Yeah, I think
Okay.
it's inside a clay pot that is wrapped in plastic,
And
and there's sphagnum moss, and it's very, very wet, and I can feel it.
And this is deceiving because the decorative cover over the top makes it look
Oh my
like
goodness.
it's dry.
Look at this.
But there's actually standing water. Watch this. See all that water in the bottom of that pot?
Yeah.
And so this decorative cover, it's coconut shells, which is very attractive, right? And nice modern look to it, but not a kind thing for the plant. Did you get this plant as a gift? Yeah, and that's, you know, it sort of has a gift presentation.
And it's a beautiful
in
pot.
a beautiful pot.
And you could use this for something else.
Yeah, and with the, you know, with the chips on the top, it's very attractive, but it's sort of certain death for the plant.
Now, here, we're going to do the big reveal now.
Okay.
Because it's very, very wet.
The drum roll. What's the verdict? Ooh, it's not looking
I
good.
don't know, I don't want to drip on you, but
Not looking good. I'm gonna put all these chips back in her pot.
Yeah.
She may want to save them.
I was thinking when I first saw this that it was savable. I'm not sure. Well, you know, there's some good white roots in here, CL. Look
Well-
what I'm finding.
You know, what I would say is we give peace a chance.
Okay.
With this plant.
Okay.
All I'm saying
Is let's give this
is
orchid
give peace a
okay.
chance.
All right. All right.
So,
And I do see some healthy roots in there. So
so should we cut off the brown roots?
yeah, let's cut off the brown roots.
You can use a scissors or a pruners
Mm-hmm.
for that.
I'm also going to take it off of,
The little ornamental.
yeah,
It had sort of an ornamental trellising
Trellis.
structure. And
it's just going to be easier to repot if we,
I think this pot goes in here, right?
yeah.
Those were both, okay. I'm gonna stick these over
That's
on
great.
the side while you do that.
Okay. Now, you can retrieve all these pieces, your pots and your trellises. We're not going to take those away from you. I'm also going to remove these wilted flowers because you do still have some buds on here that may open, but when Phalaenopsis are not happy, they often suffer from what we call bud blast, and that is the buds stay on the plant and they look like they're okay, but they're actually never going to open. But I'm not sure. This one is definitely blasted, and you can tell because it's looking kind of wrinkly. You can come up and look at that later. But the other two may be all right.
Yeah, it's got a spot on it too
Yeah.
that it's starting to go.
Yeah.
All right. So, this one is really bad here. Okay.
Talk amongst yourselves.
And if you felt these, you would feel
Yeah.
that they're almost hollow.
exactly, that's it.
Instead of being firm
Uh-huh.
and solid, they're hollow. And that's a sign in addition to the brown color.
And you might ask, well, couldn't I just leave them? Do I really have to cut them off? And the fact is, if you leave rotting plant tissue in the pot, It's going to just continue to rot, and nobody's going to be happy.
And this one may or may not make it.
But we're giving it a fighting chance.
But we're going to give it a fighting chance, right? We're going to see if we can get this refurbished here. Now we can put this right back in the same pot with bark, correct?
Absolutely, because this has a drainage hole in it.
This also? Oh no! You know what? I saw this little piece
You
of
thought it was
root
a
here.
slug?
It looked exactly like a slug. I thought, ooh, we've got wildlife, but no.
All right, I'm going to put a big piece of bark over the drainage hole so the rest of it doesn't.
All right.
How long should a root be in order to keep it? I mean, how short can you cut one and it's still viable?
Well, I would say if you looked at this plant and it was brown around the crown here and all the roots, it's probably not going to make it. You need at least a few viable roots. And as I say, this one is right on the edge.
Yeah, it is on the edge.
It's on the edge. It may make it or it may not.
You're gonna, when you take this home, you're gonna treat it in a very specific way.
And that way is?
First of all, you're gonna find a place where it gets bright indirect light, and that is an east or a west facing window. You can go ahead and center that in the. And second of all, before you water it, you're gonna stick your hand down underneath the bark. You're gonna really poke in there, and you're gonna make sure that there's no moisture left in there. This plant is probably not gonna need to be watered more than once every 7 days, okay? And when you do, you're gonna use the soaking method that we discussed before. It's going to be much easier to water this correctly now that it's in bark, because unlike the sphagnum moss, the bark is not going to hold moisture too close to the root ball, and it will dry out much more quickly.
Now you might ask, well, why do growers use sphagnum moss if they're, if it's not so good for the plant? And the reason is a lot of people who get these orchids don't want them to last, okay? They get them like a flower bouquet, only it's a plant,
And
right?
when it finishes blooming, they toss it.
And when they finish blooming, they thank it for coming and they toss it out. And so from the
gonna stand
grower's
up?
point of view, these plants don't have to last, right? And not only that, from the grower's point of view, the sphagnum moss is easy, and so that's why they do it.
Now,
I think also because a lot of times these plants are coming from Florida or California, and I think the sphagnum moss, they'll water them so they will arrive and still be alive because they were well watered in the sphagnum.
so
That could be too.
yeah.
The shipping plays a role in plants, a big role in plants for sure.
This is the last thing I'm going to say about this orchid, and this is something for you guys to remember. As I mentioned, Phalaenopsis will sometimes rebloom from an existing stem, bloom stem, if it's still green. You look on the stem and you see it's got nodes, okay? If you cut the stem just above a node, it is possible that a new stem will grow from that node. So I'm going to cut right above this node, and if you're lucky, about 50% of the time, you'll get a new stem. Oh, these are not very sharp.
Try those.
Okay. You'll get a new stem and a new round of bloom. Oh, okay, now that may be because this stem is,
Well, it could be the pruners are not good.
okay.
We didn't take the highest quality pruners off of the
off of the
shelf. We
All right.
took whatever we had in
Okay,
the
so
storeroom.
again, I'm not going to water it, but you should water it when you get it home.
Okay.
Okay?
And then once a week?
Yeah.
Okay. I think here, if you take that one too and put them over here.
We've come to the end of our orchid section. Thank you all so much. Yeah.
Someone told me they put one ice cube a week on their orchid.
She said somebody told her to put 1 ice cube a week on the orchid. The ice cube method is something that the growers devised as a way to prevent people from overwatering, basically. 1 ice cube is probably not enough for any orchid.
And if the
but
ice is-
a few ice cubes might be, as long as they're not touching the stem, it's kind of a gimmicky thing, frankly.
And that's the key, what CL said, don't let the ice cube touch the plant tissue. It's too cold and it's going to damage it. Right. I actually sometimes do use the ice cube method, not for orchids, but for houseplants that have gotten so dry that the potting mix will not absorb water. A lot of peat-based mixes become hydrophobic. But if you place a few ice cubes around the outside, it's a very slow absorption, and that gets it to absorb water again. But I wouldn't advise it for orchids. It's a gimmick,
Right.
the way she said.
Right.